The sunset painted the entire sky, in shades of red as the prairie wind howled through the bare branches of the oak trees. Elias Boone rode his horse slowly back to the ranch when the wind carried a chilling sound, the creaking of a rope. He pulled the reins. At the edge of town, beneath an old oak tree, a body hung limply. The twilight stretched its shadow across the land like a gash in the earth and sky. Elias approached, each step as heavy as stone. The hanged man's face was smeared with blood and dust, war paint running down in streaks. His eyes were shut tight, his neck swollen and purple. Elias recognized him instantly. Talon, the son of the Apache tribe's southern chief, the one the town had just condemned for betrayal. Elias's chest tightened. He had witnessed many deaths, but none had ever sent ice through his veins like this one. Then he saw it. Talon's legs gave a faint twitch. Without thinking, Elias leapt onto a wooden crate, blade flashing in his hand. The rope stretched taut, burning against his palm. Just one more cut. Snap. Talon crashed to the ground with a heavy thud. Elias dropped to his knees, cradled the young man's head, and pressed his fingers to his neck. His heart was still beating, but barely. Taking a deep breath, Elias lifted him up, heaved him onto the horse's back, and kicked the reins. The horse bolted into the haze of red dust, leaving behind a swaying rope and a silent old oak tree. The old horse barreled across the darkened prairie, red dust swirling in its wake. Elias gripped the reins tightly, struggling to keep them both balanced as Talon slumped against his shoulder, breathing heavily. Every faint heartbeat pulsing beneath his fingers sounded like a ticking clock. If he was even a little too late, the young man would die. By the time they reached the crooked gate of the ranch, Elias jumped down and dragged Talon inside. His ranch was now just a shadow of its former self, fences leaning, the roof of the stable gaping open, the old wooden house reeking of mildew. But tonight, it was the only refuge they had. He laid Talon down on an old blanket near the fireplace and lit a fire. The flickering yellow light danced across the young man's face, a deep red mark where the rope had dug in, blood seeping from the corner of his mouth, but his eyelids twitched slightly, a sign of life. Elias took out his knife and cut the rope still cinched around Talon's wrists, then gently massaged them. In the haze of smoke and flame, Elias froze. The scene pulled up memories he had long buried. During the war years, he had once cut the bindings of a captured Apache warrior, also in firelight. Also with this very same knife. That warrior later saved his life during an ambush. Now, it seemed, history was repeating itself, except the danger this time felt even greater. Elias Boone had once been a cavalryman and had seen enough blood to know what twisted justice looked like. He left the battlefield, came to this patch of land hoping for peace, raising cattle, mending fences, letting the past stay buried. But somehow, violence always found its way to those who tried to avoid it. He wiped the sweat from his brow, pulled off his coat and laid it over Talon's chest, then sank into a wooden chair, eyes fixed on the fire. The wind howled outside like a mournful cry. Elias knew that once the town realized Talon's body had disappeared, they would come looking. And if the tribe heard that the chief's son had been hanged, war would break loose. He let out a long breath, his gray eyes steeling with resolve. Like it or not, tonight he had stepped into this fight, and keeping Talon alive was the only path left to stop it. The fire in the stove crackled softly, casting a warm yellow glow against the worn wooden walls. Elias sat motionless, his back against the chair, a rifle resting across his knees. Darkness filled the room, broken only by the labored breathing of Talon, a quiet reminder that the boy was still alive. Near midnight, Talon stirred. A faint groan escaped his lips. Elias was at his side in an instant, lifting his head and offering him some water. Talon swallowed with difficulty, but then his heavy eyelids slowly opened. His dark eyes flickered with firelight, darting around in confusion. When he saw Elias, instinct took over. He jolted upright, hands flailing as if searching for a weapon. Elias gently pressed his shoulder down, his voice hoarse but firm. "Easy now. If I wanted to hurt you, you would have been dead back when you were hanging from that tree." Talon froze, breathing hard. After a moment, he gave a slight nod, as if accepting the truth in those words. Elias poured a bit more water. Talon drank, then finally spoke for the first time, voice rough but clear. "Talon." Elias nodded, committing the name to memory. "I am Elias Boone. Why did they hang you?" Talon shut his eyes, his jaw tight. After a long silence, he spoke, each word scraping his throat. I am not a traitor. They set me up. Elias sat down by the fire, listening in silence as Talon recounted the story in fragments. He was the only son of the tribe's chief. He had uncovered a plot town traders, secretly selling gunpowder to a gang operating near the border. When he warned his tribe, they lured him into town, framed him for betrayal, and hanged him to silence him for good. The story made Elias's blood boil. He had smelled the stench of conspiracy ever since leaving the battlefield, but now it had come pounding right to his doorstep. Talon exhaled, fire flickering in his eyes. They will come back. I have to warn my father. Elias nodded. Before you go anywhere, you need to survive. You are still too weak. He pulled the blanket up over him, then turned to check his rifle, loading it fully. Tonight, this old ranch would have to hold. Even alone, Elias would keep the young man alive because if he died, the entire valley would drown in blood. Outside, the night wind howled louder, like a warning of something drawing near. Elias sat back down, hands gripping the rifle, ready for anyone bold enough to knock on his door in the dark. Dawn came slowly the next morning. Weak sunlight slipped through the cracks in the door, spilling into the cramped little room. Talon was fully awake now, sitting with his back against the wooden wall, his dark eyes quietly tracking Elias's every move. Elias placed a bowl of cold corn porridge in front of him. Eat. You are going to need your strength if you plan to stand again. Talon stared at him for a long moment, his eyes still wary, before finally reaching out. His thin hands trembled, but he finished every spoonful. Elias gave a small nod and said nothing more. The tension in the cabin began to ease. All morning, Elias chopped wood outside, patched up the stable roof as best he could, while Talon sat silently, watching. Then, for the first time, the young man spoke. You knew saving me would bring serious trouble. Why did you still do it? Elias leaned on his axe, wiping sweat from his brow. Young man, I do not care who you are. I still would have saved you. Because every one of us deserves a chance to live. Talon stayed quiet, his eyes darkening. Then he nodded slowly, acknowledging a debt that did not need to be spoken aloud. By late afternoon, Elias handed him a small knife. If they come back, you are going to need this. Talon took it, turning it over in his hands. His eyes no longer burned with just hatred now, there was a flicker of resolve. Even though he was on white man's land, Talon knew the man before him was not the enemy. On the second night, the wind howled harder, the cabin door creaking in protest. Elias sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle, while Talon lay on the wooden cot. Suddenly, he spoke. My father, he will think I am dead. They will be angry, and there will be war. Elias looked up, the firelight flickering in his gray eyes. We will find a way to tell him the truth. But first, you need to be strong enough to ride. Talon tightened his grip on the knife and gave a firm nod. In that moment, between the two men, an invisible bond was formed built on trust. Outside, the darkness thickened. In the night wind, Elias heard the sound of hooves echoing in the distance. He stood and moved toward the door. Talon sat up, his hand resting on the knife handle. On the far horizon, a few small flames moved through the black torchlight, and the sound of hooves grew louder by the second. Elias turned back, loading his Winchester, voice low and steely. Stay quiet. They are coming. It is going to be a long night. Thank you for being here. If this story brought back memories of dusty sunsets, or the sound of hoofbeats echoing in your heart, subscribe to my channel. So each day we can sit down together, and I will tell you another tale from the Wild West. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder by the second, pounding against the earth until the ground itself trembled. Elias stood motionless in the doorway, his Winchester gripped tightly in his hands. Inside the cabin, Talon sat still, his shadow flickering on the wooden wall with the firelight. In moments, torchlight flooded the yard. Over a dozen riders from the town surrounded the ranch. Leading them was Morrison, the saloon owner, known far and wide as a troublemaker. He sat firm in the saddle, his belly bouncing with each step of his horse, shouting above the howling wind. Boone, I know you cut that savage loose. Hand him over, if you want to live to see another few years. Elias stepped fully onto the porch, his tall, lean frame casting a long shadow in the firelight. Talon is no traitor. If you want him, you will have to go through me first. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, followed by the sharp click of guns being cocked. One rider pointed his weapon toward the cabin. "You got no right to harbor a criminal," he yelled. Elias raised his Winchester and leveled it straight at the man. "And you have no right to hang someone without a trial." The air turned heavy, drawn tight like a bowstring. Just one shot, and the whole place would erupt into a battlefield. Inside the cabin, Talon gripped his knife, his eyes blazing. Elias knew he was ready to rush out if things went south. Then, from the distance, came the haunting call of an Apache war horn, long and echoing. The townsmen froze, some glancing over their shoulders in panic. Moments later, another wave of hoofbeats approached, low, steady, and thunderous. From behind the ridge, dozens of riders emerged. Feathers and war paint glimmered in the torchlight. Over 50 Apache warriors encircled the ranch, forming a tight, unbreakable ring. Morrison went pale, shouting orders for his men to fall back, but it was too late. One rider broke from the circle and rode forward. It was the Chief Talon's father. He wore a deerskin robe, and his face looked carved from stone. He stopped at the gate, his voice deep and firm. "White man, you saved my son?" Elias tightened his grip on the rifle, then slowly lowered the barrel, locking eyes with the chief. "Yes, and I would do it again, if I had to choose." Silence fell. Every eye turned to the chief, then to the cabin door, where Talon was now rising, stepping out into the light. The cabin door swung open. Talon stepped out, still weak, but his eyes burned bright. The firelight revealed the dark red rope marks across his neck, a living testament to what had been done. The town's riders fell silent, their faces showing clear shock. The chief slowly dismounted, his boots landing heavy on the ground. He stood face to face with his son, his expression carved from stone. "They say you betrayed the tribe, that you sold our secrets to the townspeople." Talon lifted his chin, voice hoarse but unwavering. "I did not betray anyone. It was Morrison and his men who sold gunpowder to the raiders near the border. I tried to warn the tribe. They tied me up, accused me of treason, and tried to silence me." The words dropped like stones into a still lake. The Apache warriors growled, their spears striking the earth with sharp, angry thuds. Morrison's face went pale. He sputtered in protest. "He is lying. He is a savage traitor." Elias stepped forward, raising his Winchester, his voice hard as iron. "I cut him down. I heard his story while he was barely breathing. That is why I have been protecting him. And all of you should hear the truth too." The air was tight, wound like a drawn bow. The chief looked at his son, then turned his gaze to Elias. For a moment, his eyes softened. He turned to his warriors and gave a command. "Lower your bows. No blood will be spilled tonight, but the truth will be revealed." Morrison cursed, barking for his men to turn their horses and ride out. But an arrow slammed into the ground before his horse's hooves, blocking the way. The chief turned back, his voice cold as the mountain wind. "You are going nowhere. At dawn, the council will hold judgment. If my son has lied, both of these men will die. If he has spoken truth, then you will pay." The town's riders murmured nervously. Morrison clenched his jaw, but fear was written all over his face. Talon stood tall, though his body swayed. He stepped toward his father. Their eyes met, one filled with fury, the other with the plea for justice. Finally, the chief laid a heavy hand on his son's shoulder, acknowledging that his words were enough to keep him alive at least for one more night. Elias exhaled, sweat soaking the back of his shirt. But he knew the real trial was yet to come, and when the sun rose, it would not just be Talon's life on the line, but his own honor as well. The next morning broke cold, with thick fog blanketing the valley. The entire town gathered at the clearing, where the tribal council had lit a wide ring of fire. The flames cast a glow on the stern faces of the Apache elders, making the air heavy with tension, thick enough to choke on. Elias stood in the center of the circle, hands bound. Talon knelt beside him. Morrison had been dragged there too, his face flushed red, still yelling, "This is our land. You have no right to judge me." The chief rose, his voice booming like thunder. "No blood was spilled last night, but today, the truth will be spoken before all. If my son has lied, he will die by my own hand. If he has told the truth, the man who betrayed this valley will pay with his life." Talon was helped to his feet. He stepped into the center of the fire ring, his voice hoarse but clear. I heard Morrison speaking with the raiders. I saw him trade gunpowder for gold. I was beaten, tied up, and hung from an oak tree so everyone would believe I was the traitor. A murmur rose from the townsfolk. An old man stepped forward, voice trembling. I saw Morrison's wagons leaving town that night. I thought it was salt he was hauling. The noise grew louder. Morrison writhed, shouting, "You fools! He is lying to save his neck." Boone is a traitor too. He hid that savage in his ranch. Elias clenched his fists. He looked straight at the crowd, voice sharp as steel. If saving a man's life makes me a traitor, then I would betray this whole town. A thunderous pounding of spears rang out from the circle of Apache warriors. The chief raised his hand, calling for silence, then turned to Morrison. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Morrison was speechless. His eyes darted around wildly. Suddenly, one of his men turned and bolted on horseback. The twang of a bowstring echoed, and an arrow slammed into the dirt before the horse's hooves. The man fell, stammering out a confession. Morrison was the one behind the gun trade all along. The circle erupted in shouts. The elders exchanged glances, then nodded. Morrison was seized, tied up, and thrown into the center of the fire ring. His face turned pale, drenched in sweat. The chief turned to Elias and Talon. His eyes were still stern, but now held a quiet warmth. "My son lives, because of you. You spoke the truth, and you stood tall in the face of the blade." Elias felt the rope around his wrists being cut. He rubbed his wrists, inhaling deeply. For the first time in many years, he no longer felt like an outsider. The air inside the fire ring was strung tight as a bow. Suddenly, Morrison let out a furious roar. He lunged, grabbing a knife from the belt of one of his men, and charged at Talon. It all happened too fast. Elias reacted like the soldier he once was. He lunged forward, pushing Talon behind him, grabbed the Winchester leaning against the post, and pulled the trigger. The deafening crack tore through the morning air. Morrison collapsed, the knife falling from his hand, blood spilling across the earth. But his men were not done. They shouted and opened fire in a frenzy. The Apache warriors raised their bows and unison arrows hissed through the air like angry wasps. Battle erupted in the heart of the valley. Elias stood in front of Talon, firing shot after shot with precision. Each recoil sent pain through his shoulder, but he did not stop. Talon joined the fight, wielding the small knife Elias had given him just the day before, taking down a man who got too close. Shouts, gunfire, horses screaming, it all blended into a chaotic symphony. Flames flickered, gun smoke burned the air. When the final bullet was fired, the ground was littered with bodies. The surviving attackers were tied up and thrown to the dirt like sacks of grain. The chief stepped into the center of the ring, his face heavy but proud. He turned to Elias, his voice booming, "You risked your life to save my son. And tonight, you stood with us to wipe out the true traitors. From now on, your life is bound to his. When this valley calls for you, you will answer." Elias nodded silently. He looked at Talon, now standing tall, his dark eyes burning with resolve. In that moment, Elias no longer felt like an old rancher. He was a man with purpose once more, a man who could still fight for truth and for justice. As the sun rose fully over the valley, its light cut through the lingering haze of gunpowder. Elias stood, rifle slung across his shoulder, his shadow joining with Talon's and the Apache warriors. A new chapter had begun, one written in blood, honor, and truth. My friend, there are bonds you have to break, even knowing your life will never be the same. Because once you save a man from death, you also save yourself from your own cowardice. And that is a kind of justice even the desert must respect. And finally, I have a small wish to share. To all the dear viewers of Wild West storytelling, I truly hope you live a happy and healthy life. I love you all. Let me know what you thought of this story. Drop a comment below. Hit 1 if you enjoyed the story, and do not forget to subscribe channel for more thrilling tales from the Wild West.